Hi everybody. I hope somebody's out there and that you can hear me. Welcome to Spooky Story Tuesdays. This is the first edition, and this is also my first time ever using Facebook Live, so that is what the shelter in place has brought me to, a new way of communicating. First, let's take care of some business. As you can see, I have Mr. Oscar. Whoop. I cannot get this right. He is on this side. Hello. Oscar's here. And I've got my little crow friend right here. I've got a candle for ambiance there in the back. Since for thousands of years people enjoyed scary stories by candlelight and flashlight and firelight and everything. Probably not flashlight, before we had electricity. And now I also have my special friend Moonlight here, who is currently using my armpit as a second home. So welcome. Yes, welcome for the 3 people who are here. This is going to be fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some spooky stories to you. You don't have to look, but you can. Yes, there is a snake. Hello, hello. So we'll see how long Moonlight can handle being around my neck before she goes completely inside of my dress, like that. All right, bear with me as I learn how to use this magical technology that is Facebook. Okay, so let me show you what we're going to be reading tonight. If you have any kitties with you, you guys can opt in or opt out as necessary. We're going to be reading from In a Dark, Dark Room, one of my favorite storybooks as a kid, from Alvin Schwartz. Tonight, we're going to have a bit of a Chicago theme. We're going to read The Night It Rained. And next week, we're going to read The Girl with the Green Ribbon. So everybody who remembers that story from when they were a kid needs to emotionally prepare for that one. We're going to read from another story book that I like a lot, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I've got 2 stories on deck. One is one of my all-time favorite folk tales, The Wendigo, or Wendigo. I'm going to say The Wendigo. And The Hook, which has some roots in Chicago. Then we are going to transition over to my friend Ursula Bielski's book, Haunted Bachelors Grove, where we're going to learn more about the roots of The Hook in Haunted Chicago. And we're going to talk about Haunted Bachelors Grove also. I'm going to read the whole passage about the Vanishing House, or the Magic House as it's put in here. You can support Ursula. She's one of my good friends right now. You can buy these books online, preferably from either Barnes & Noble or an indie retailer, or if you're still in a place in the country that's doing curbside pickup, a local bookseller. She also has the Chicago Hauntings Ghost Tours that you can support right now too. And then I will read my story having to do with Haunted Bachelors Grove, stay with me now, from Encounters with the Paranormal from my publisher Haunted Road Media. And that'll be fun. And of course we're going to end with a story about Bigfoot. I don't know if these stories are true or not. The author of this book purports them to be true, or at least true stories that somebody else related to him. Either way, they're kooky, they're fun. Let's get started. One more note, actually. I promised I would share with everybody what I'm currently reading. So in the non-exciting category, I'm right now reading the Interfaith Prayer Book. So I'm just doing 1 section a day. And I find that kind of meditative right now. So that's been good on this particular journey that we're all on together right now. And then this one, Gumbo Yaya, which is a collection of Louisiana folklore and folk tales, and also just folk life, folk history. So food, culture, music, everything. And hopefully by the time we get to like week 6 of this Spooky Story Tuesdays, I'll be able to have some good ones and hear from you. Wow, there's a lot of people here. I'm glad that you weren't with me in the beginning when I was like pointing in opposite directions. So smooth. Okay. All right, everybody. Let's get our spooky on. It's not exactly dark out, but I do, see, I did it again. I do have that 1 candle for you there. All right. The Night It Rained. Yes, I do have a snake. Moonlight is a spotted python. They are some of the smallest snakes in the world from the east coast of Australia. All right. It was late at night. I was driving past the cemetery when I saw a boy standing in the rain. "Do you want to ride home?" I asked. "Yes, please," he said. "I live on Front Street next to the school." I handed him my old sweater. "It is cold tonight," I said, "and you are wet. You had better put this on." After that, we did not talk. When we stopped at his house, I said, "Keep the sweater. I will get it tomorrow. What is your name?" "Jim," he said. "Thanks for the ride." And these awesome illustrations from Dirk Zimmer. I stopped for the sweater the next day. A woman came to the door. "Is Jim at home?" I asked. "I have come to pick up my sweater." She looked at me in a strange way. "It must have been another boy," she said. "Jim is our son, but he has been dead for almost a year. He is buried in the cemetery." I told her how sorry I was, and I left. I did not know what to think. The next morning I went to the cemetery. I wanted to see Jim's grave. Lying across the grave was my sweater. Now, those of you who are native Chicagoans who are also interested in ghost and folklore will recognize that as very similar to the legend of Resurrection Mary. So, connecting us into some more Chicago-themed stories, we're going to switch over to Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Hi, everybody who's coming along. First, I'm going to read one of my all-time favorites. This book, and this is the original copy that I had when I was a kiddo, scared me to death when I was little, and it is one of the most banned books of all time. And it has these amazing illustrations by Stephen Gamble. Same author, Alvin Schwartz. All right, let me get this in the... There we go. All right, you don't need to see my face. The Wendigo. A wealthy man wanted to go hunting in a part of northern Canada where few people had ever hunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him, but no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. Finally, he found an Indian who needed money badly, and he agreed to take him. The Indian's name was Defago. It's possible that this story has not aged too super. They made camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they hunted, but they had nothing to show for it. The third night, a windstorm came up. They lay in their tent listening to the wind howling and the trees whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What he saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring, and the trees were standing perfectly still. Yet he could hear the wind howling. And the more he listened, the more it sounded as if it were calling Defago's name. "Defago," it called. "Defago." I must be losing my mind, the hunter thought. But Defago had gotten out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in a corner of the tent, his head buried in his arms. "What's this all about?" the hunter asked. "It's nothing," Defago said. But the wind continued to call to him, and Defago became more tense and more restless. "Defago," it called. "Defago." Suddenly, he jumped to his feet and began to run from the tent. But the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. "You can't leave me out here," the hunter shouted. Then the wind called again, and Defago broke loose and ran into the darkness. The hunter could hear him screaming as he went. Again and again he cried, "Oh, my fiery feet, my burning feet of fire." Then his voice faded away, and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed Defago's tracks in the snow. They went through the woods, down toward the lake, then out onto the ice. I'll show you the illustration. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps Defago had taken got longer and longer. They were so long no human being could have taken them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks out to the middle of the lake, but there they disappeared. At first he thought that Defago had fallen through the ice, but there wasn't any hole. Then he thought that something had pulled him off the ice into the sky, but that made no sense. As he stood wondering what had happened, the wind picked up again. Soon it was howling as it had the night before. Then he heard Defago's voice. It was coming up from above, and again he heard Defago screaming, "My fiery feet, my burning feet!" But there was nothing to be seen. Now the hunter wanted to leave that place as fast as he could. He went back to camp and packed. Then he left some food for Defago and he started out. Weeks later he reached civilization. The following year he went back to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what had happened to Defago that night, but they had not seen him since then. "Maybe it was the Wendigo," one of them said, and he laughed. "It's supposed to come with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until your feet are burned away, and more of you than that. Then it carries you into the sky, and it drops you. It's just a crazy story, but that's what some of the Indians say." A few days later, the hunter was at the trading post again. An Indian came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him, and he wore his hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something familiar about him. He walked over and asked, "Are you Defago?" The Indian didn't answer. "Do you know anything about him?" No answer. He began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help, but he couldn't see his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. No answer. To get a look at him, he lifted the Indian's hat. Then he screamed. There was nothing under the hat but a pile of ashes. I'll let you all recover while I try to find out where the snake went. She's down here somewhere. Oh, here she is, nestled. Where is she? Oh, she's on the chair. I got you. For those who just joined, I have a snake somewhere. It's loose in the house. All right. Now we're going to read The Hook from the same book, which also has a Chicago origin, which we'll get to once we get to the Haunted Bachelors Grove book. All right. All right, peep this creepy illustration. The Hook. I know a lot of you have probably heard this. Donald and Sarah went to the movies. Then they went for a ride in Donald's car. They parked up on a hill at the edge of town. From there they could see the lights up and down the valley. Donald turned on the radio and found some music, but an announcer broke in with a news bulletin. A murderer had escaped from the state prison. He was armed with a knife and was headed south on foot. His left hand was missing. In its place, he wore a hook. "Let's roll up the windows and lock the doors," said Sarah. "That's a good idea," said Donald. "That prison isn't too far away," said Sarah. "Maybe we really should go home." "But it's only 10 o'clock, said Donald. "I don't care what time it is," she said. "I want to go home." "Look," Sarah said, Donald, "he's not going to climb all the way up here. Why would he do that? Even if he did, all the doors are locked. How could he get in?" "Donald, he could take that hook and break through a window and open a door," she said. "I'm scared. I want to go home." Donald was annoyed. "Girls always are afraid of something," he said. As he started the car, Sarah thought she heard something or someone scratching at the door. "Did you hear that?" she asked as they roared away. It sounded like somebody was trying to get in. "Oh, sure," said Donald. Soon they got to her house. "Would you like to come in and have some cocoa?" she asked. "No," he said. "I've got to go home." He went around to the other side of the car to let her out. Hanging on the door handle was a hook. All right, folks. That was that. So let's transition a little bit over to the next thing. So, this book is really cool. And again, if you want to support some of the local authors and people that I know or people that we're friends with, you can buy these books, sometimes straight from the author. This is by Ursula Bielski. You can support Chicago Hauntings and some other businesses. I know I have some other friends here with small businesses, tour companies, and books, if you want to drop something in the comments about that. And also, I will take requests for future weeks as long as we're going to be doing this. So if you want me to read one of your stories or anything else, just let me know, or one of your favorites. In any case, let's read about the origin of the hook and what it has to do with Haunted Bachelors Grove, south of the city of Chicago. Another immensely popular tale at Bachelors Grove is that of the hook, or the hooked maniac. In this tale, another couple is parked along a dark forest road one night, kissing, the radio playing softly. Suddenly, the music is interrupted by an emergency announcement. A killer has escaped the nearby asylum and is on the loose in the area. He is identifiable by a hook he wears in place of a missing hand. The girl is terrified and begs to be taken home immediately. The young man grudgingly obliges, but when they arrive at her house and he goes around to open her door, the young man finds a rusted hook swinging from the door handle. The killer had been ready to open the girl's car door as he pulled out of the woods. Interestingly, there is a one-armed sniper or one-armed caretaker who has been tied to Bachelors Grove, often as part of a phantom caretaker legend. Could a local resident have lost a hand in a farming or factory accident and worn one of the primitive hook-like prosthetics of the day? Or perhaps the man was a World War I or even Civil War veteran, of which there were many living in Bremen Township during the purging of the settlers from their land. Did this settler perhaps confront young couples who were parking in the Lover's Lane or in the cemetery, startling them with his unusual appearance? With the widespread circulation of the story of the hook in the 1930s and 40s, it would not be surprising if local teenagers transformed an unfortunate and well-meaning neighbor into a hooked maniac. Cue maniacal laughter. Okay. Now let's dive deep into another one of my favorite stories from Bachelors Grove. And if there's homework from tonight, please also look up Haunted Bachelors Grove, Resurrection Mary, The Magic House of Bachelors Grove. If you're interested in ghost stories, Chicago's quite a haunted place. It's a good time to go down the rabbit hole since we have all this time on our hands. All right. Is everybody ready? I'll take that as a yes. Okay. Experiences of vanishing houses, usually believed to be evidence of time slips or wrinkles in time, have been told in many parts of the world and in many eras. Probably the most well-known of these incidents became known as the Moberly-Jourdain incident, otherwise known as the ghosts of Petit Trianon, please excuse my pronunciation, which supposedly were experienced by Charlotte Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain in Versailles, France in the early 20th century. During a visit to the Petit Trianon, a small house on the grounds of the Palace of Versailles, the two women claimed to have been transported to the site the way it looked in the 18th century, and to have seen buildings, a bridge, and other structures that they could not have known about, but that had been demolished years before. They also claimed to have seen the ghosts of Marie Antoinette and other prominent 18th century characters. During the experience, the women said they felt an overpowering sense of oppression and a sinister feeling from the people and structures they encountered. They also described the scenery and its inhabitants as flat and lifeless. The pair became interested in the history of Versailles after their experience, and they soon returned to visit the Trianon Gardens again, but could not find the path they had walked, nor could they locate the bridge they'd seen. Further, while the gardens had been nearly empty on their earlier visit, populated with just a few antiquely attired people, now they were filled with modern tourists. In 1911, two young women published their experiences in a book called An Adventure. Though the book was widely popular, the pair was roundly shamed by critics, including the Society for Psychical Research, which believed the two women had simply been mistaken about the preternatural aspect of what they had seen. Bloop. Rougham Green in the English region of Suffolk has for a century and a half hosted a phantom house. In 1860, a local farmer, Robert Palfrey, was baling hay on a summer evening when he felt a sudden chill on the warm night. He looked up to see a large red brick house with lush gardens surrounding it, though no house existed in the area. Some years later, in 1912, Palfrey's grandson, James Cole, was driving a pony trap with the village butcher, George Waylett, when again the temperature plummeted and they heard a whooshing noise. The animal reared, throwing Waylett to the ground. There, in front of the men and the pony, had appeared a massive Georgian house, surrounded by beautiful blooming gardens. A moment before, there had been only a farm field and no structures of any kind. Seconds later, the house became enshrouded in mist and then vanished again. The house would be seen again in 1926 when a young teacher and her pupil were walking through the area and came upon a huge house with a wall surrounding it and huge iron gates at the entrance. Returning home, the teacher, new to the area, inquired as to the residents of the grand home. She was informed that there was no such house in existence. Sure enough, when the pair returned to the site on another walk, they found the spot empty. Even the Chicago area has vanishing houses outside of Bachelors Grove. In the northwest suburbs, Cuba Road is known as an extremely haunted tract that runs through old farms and country houses. A vanishing house that has been reported by travelers reportedly seems as real as can be, but disappears in the rearview mirror or is gone upon a return visit. Perhaps no vanishing house, however, is more well known in the annals of ghost lore than the magic house of Bachelors Grove. And I'll tell my story in the next segment. Amelia's account, that's me, introduces many common motifs of the widely experienced House of Bachelors Grove, which has been seen by what can only be estimated to be hundreds of visitors, based on the nearly 60 eyewitness accounts I myself have gathered the past 30 years without even really soliciting them. One is the style of the house. Every single account of the house describes it as a white farmhouse or farm-style house around 1.5 stories tall, a simple frame house with a dormer or attic. A second detail, that of the cross-pane window, is common to most every sighting. The window is the focal point, and many witnesses have seen only a window and no house, or have photographed only a window and no house. Particular to the window is a light burning inside. Witnesses insist this light is glowing or flickering, and some described it as soft and golden and say that it is a natural firelight, not electric, although one woman who saw the house in the 1960s told Richard Crowe she'd thought it might have been light from a television set and remembered looking for cables that might have explained electricity in these isolated woods. The porch swing mentioned by Amelia, too, is almost always mentioned in descriptions of the house, and some accounts even talk about it swinging gently. The feeling that the house is leading one somewhere, attracting one to it, is almost universally prevalent in accounts. Walking toward it, only to have it shrink or get smaller and smaller before disappearing is similarly overwhelmingly experienced. Lastly, and most chillingly, the feeling of menace or malevolence from the house and the impression that some intelligence is taking pleasure in frightening or unnerving the witness are emotional effects shared by a majority of experiencers and are reminiscent of the experiences of the women at Versailles, Snakeface, so many years ago. All right, I'll stop there. I was very ambitious about the stories I picked tonight, so I want to make sure I keep us to a half hour like I promised. So I will share my tale from Bachelors Grove, which is featured not only in Haunted Bachelors Grove, this amazing book by Ursula Bielski, but also in Encounter with the Paranormal from my publisher, Haunted Road Media. This snake, though, am I right? Okay. In April 2009, I visited Bachelors Grove Cemetery in Midlothian, Illinois for the first time after moving to Chicago from Maryland in early 2008. It was after dark and I was with a group of about 8 people. After exploring quietly on our own, we were mysteriously drawn together near the entrance of the cemetery, where we made small talk until one of us noticed a round light glowing in the woods, in the direction of the path leading back to the road. We all observed this light, having not seen it earlier in the night. I stood wondering if the light was coming from a distant street light, a house on the other side of the woods, the moon, or even an illuminated street sign. A few of us made similar remarks out loud as we then watched the light change shape. It took on the form of a rectangular window with a cross-patterned wooden pane. Its glow was soft and evoked a sensation of reading by candlelight or soft, low light. This cozy image was offset by a deep feeling of menace and a sensation of being looked into by whatever it was that was creating this window. The image developed further in my mind of a house around the window, a classic-looking 2-story white farmhouse with a swing on the front porch. Again, this normally benign image was extremely unsettling. We decided to follow the light to see if we could find its origin. As if in a trance, we all got on the path and started walking away from the cemetery and toward the light. The light lost its window shape and became round again and seemed to move alongside us off into the distance. It danced up and down, getting higher and lower and pulsating. It was thick enough for us to observe tree branches passing in front of as it moved. For all our efforts to take photos, however, we could not capture it on film. None of us had video cameras, just regular digital cameras, since the night was meant to be a simple exploratory outing for fun. Before we all knew it, we were back out on the road. Each of us filed quietly into our van and didn't speak of how strange it was that just moments earlier we were all intent on exploring the cemetery, and now, without question or discussion, we had left. This mysterious light seemed to have lured us out of the cemetery, as if it wanted us gone. It wasn't until I got home that I snapped out of it and came to this realization. About 2 weeks later, we all got together again, and the others described the similar experience of realizing later what had actually happened. We also learned that the sighting of a phantom house and strange lights are common around the cemetery and part of its infamous ghost lore. I was very disturbed by this experience and the images of the window and house, and I had a hard time talking about them for a long time. Every time I would think about them, I would feel like whatever it was that caused this to occur was in my thoughts again, and, as bizarre as it might sound, was pleased with the effect it had on me. As someone who has studied and experienced the supernatural for years, I still cannot place this phantom house experience into any neat and clean paranormal category. Today I feel more empowered to talk about it now that several years have passed, and I'd say, although still with some hesitation, that I feel privileged to have experienced the legendary phantom house. I've visited Bachelors Grove several times since, and I know it's a very special and very haunted place. Whew, all right, we've got one more. If you're willing to stick around. Ooh, okay, good. No, we're perfect on time. Moonlight's reading with me. We're going to read this phenomenally told story from Rusty Wilson's More Bigfoot Campfire Stories, meaning there is a first edition of Campfire Stories. So run out and get that before it flies off the shelves. Okay. This story that I've chosen is called The Night Hikers. And the note from the author about this is that the fellow who told this story was a fairly intense individual, and I thought I might have a hard time guiding him on a fly fishing trip, as I'm usually a pretty mellow guy. I wasn't sure if he could relax enough to have a good time and enjoy the fishing. It was his first time out, and he ended up really liking it. When he told us this tale around the campfire, I got a little glimpse into his character. He was intense, but not ashamed to admit to being afraid like some guys are, and he turned out to be a really humble fellow who had practically driven himself to the brink of a nervous breakdown, he later told me. That was before he discovered fly fishing, of course. At his request, only very general information is included in this story. All right, now this is from the perspective of the man. My name is Carl, and I used to like to climb things. There goes Snake. He's fine. I've climbed a lot of big peaks, and I usually would go solo, as I like my own pace and solitude. My story is pretty simple, but it scared me a lot. I was camped at around 11,000 feet, according to my topo, in a high mountain meadow in the Wind River Range of Wyoming. I was going to get up early the next day and climb 2 peaks, both somewhat close together. Both were tough climbs. I had arrived late in the evening and set up my little tent next to the trail in a little clearing. This was about 10 years ago, almost to the day, July 4th. I was started up a high pass on the hill above the big meadow at the base of the pass, which I could see down below me. I didn't want to camp there as it felt too open. When you go solo all the time, you naturally become a bit wary and try to keep a low profile. It becomes second nature. When you come up the trail, at one point you have to cross a pretty wild stream. I don't know if there's a bridge now, but at the time the old wooden bridge had collapsed and you had to cross on fallen logs and rocks, and it's a bit hairy, especially with a big pack on, as it's almost a waterfall at that point. It's usually still pretty roily at this time of year with runoff. I made the crossing with no problems, but went slow. So I got there at dusk and set up my tent and went to bed. I remember seeing the alpenglow on the peaks above me and thinking it was a shame I was so tired. I wanted to stay up and look at the night sky, but I was exhausted. No idea why, as I was in good shape and it's only a few miles up there, but not that bad, maybe 6 or 7. I also remember thinking how quiet it was, and contrasting that to what I knew what was going on all over the country, the fireworks and noise. I quickly fell asleep. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night in a complete dread. It was so bad I immediately got up and started dressing. I knew I had to get out of there now. Something bad was going to happen. I was ready to take my tent down and stuff everything into my backpack, and then I slowed down enough to remember the stream crossing. There was no way I could do that at night. I was in a quandary. I knew I had to get out of there, yet I had no idea why. I forced myself to crawl back into the tent and lay there, and it was a monumental task given my mental state. I was terrified, but had no idea why. I was beginning to panic. I've never panicked before or since, so it was a very scary feeling. As I lay there, unable to sleep and forcing myself not to get up and flee, I heard something coming down the trail. The dread intensified. Whatever it was walking on 2 feet, and it was big. My first thought was a bear. I just lay there, very still. Whatever this was came closer and closer to my tent, then stopped. I could now hear at least one more coming, maybe 2, crunching on the small rocks on the trail. then silence. You have no idea how terrifying something like that can be until you've experienced it. I don't go armed, too much extra weight to carry, plus I don't care much for guns, so I was pretty much defenseless. I just lay there, and whatever it was, just stood there. I decided that I had to see what was going on or I was going to have a full-on panic attack, so I very slowly and quietly sat up, then angled around to where I could peek out the tent door, hopefully without being seen. There was no moonlight of any kind, but I could make out 3 very large creatures standing above my tent, looking down at me against the backdrop of incredible night sky, thick with stars. The night visitors looked huge, and I estimated they were at least 7 or 8 feet tall, and they were all black. They were not bears. They then just as quietly moved off, going on down the trail. As they passed, they seemed even bigger. They walked as if they could see quite well in the dark. I don't really recall much after that except waking up to a beautiful blue sky, and when I finally was awake and could remember what happened, feeling a sense of having had a weird dream. But I knew I'd been awake. My stuff sack for my sleeping bag had been pulled from my backpack, and I remembered doing that, getting ready to pack up and leave during the night. I knew it wasn't a dream and puzzled over it. I finally got up and packed everything up and went ahead up on the pass. I then decided to forego climbing as I was too tired, so I crested the pass and stood there looking down on the huge valley that separates the 2 big peaks I had wanted to climb. I was suddenly deflated and just sat down in the tundra. The previous night's events had taken their toll. All I wanted to do was go home. I felt tired. I turned around and headed back down the pass. I have no idea who or what the 3 creatures were, but I do know that I saw something. I've since read that Bigfoot can supposedly produce infrasound, which has the exact effects I felt that night. It's also possible it was altitude sickness. Who knows? But to this day, I prefer not to hike in the Wind River Range. Why? The creatures did me no harm. It's hard to explain, but now I know my world is shared with these other creatures, and I don't want to meet them again. So that concludes my stories for tonight, and if you do want to meet me again, I will be back here next Tuesday at 6 o'clock with more stories to share. Next week's theme is going to be haunted dolls, so get prepared for that, and then you can comment or email or anything you want if you have special requests or if you have somebody's work that you'd like to showcase, as long as it's a scary story. And I'd like to thank my special guest, Moonlight. She is a spotted python from Australia, and I think Oscar's here as well. Let me get out of the way so you can see Mr. Oscar taking a nice little nap back there by candlelight. I hope everybody stays safe and cozy and healthy in these times, and thank you all for tuning in. I will see you next week.